Okay, good evening, wrestling fans. Mike Leotis back with season 2 of Wrestler Weekly Conversations. I have with me today a great guest that you guys are really going to like. You're going to know him if you're following on social media and also hearing his podcast. But want to really quickly tell you where you can find us at Wrestler Weekly on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You could also pick up our book, Family Bacon Wrestling, by the CEO himself, superstar Carolina Reaper, Scotty Richardson. Great book. A new book in the works too, Belt versus Belt, about the Super Bowl of wrestling, Harley Race versus superstar Billy Graham down in the rainy Orange Bowl in Miami. But you can catch this guy at Heel Will Mahoney on Twitter. You can catch the podcast, Big Gold Belt. Episodes drop every Friday. In fact, they're back this coming week, right after the Royal Rumble. They took January off, but their end-of-year shows are up. You could hear their end-of-year reviews, and so they'll be back recording right in time for you to get a Royal Rumble review. So hopefully you're watching. But I want to bring in Will Mahoney. Thanks, Will, for jumping in and talking some wrestling with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Mike. And it's a great feeling to start the new year behind the mic again. Like I said, here at the Big Gold Belt, we took things off for the first, part of January with the idea of starting refreshed when WrestleMania season really begins with the Royal Rumble and all that. But it's good to be back behind the mic. I guess this is my first time behind the mic here in 2021. And I'm excited to be on with Wrestler Weekly with you guys, between the history, all the retro magazines. I mean, my God, and everyone that you guys have been interviewing, I'm feeling like small potatoes here. I'm not, man. I am not the star that your esteemed guests before me have been. So I'm gonna try to keep up here.
I would say you are quite the star, my friend. I would say, like I said, you are a passionate wrestling fan, a knowledgeable wrestling fan. And if you follow Will, like I said, Will is refreshing because so many people kind of, and I think we've seen use the term before, hate watch wrestling. Now, there's just so many negatives. And for a while too, we even stopped covering anything recent at Wrestler Weekly because we were just so turned off by the negativity. People were like, well, you can't post magazines with the Horsemen and like Kenny Omega, and so it was a tough sell, but we are back. We do some of the current wrestling. So why don't we start there? We're going to talk about some of the classic wrestling momentarily. 2021, the year is here. 2020, for the year and the hecticness that it was with COVID, wrestling with no fans, a different style of wrestling. Wrestling can be a good escape. So if you're watching the current stuff, if you're watching classic stuff on the network or on YouTube, like, thank God for digital media. Like, I was a tape trader back in the day, like I used to, that was my, oh man, all right. Yeah. Well, I got all the WWF stuff. You got some Portland stuff, from 1978, that was the stuff I wanted, but you take a look now, 2021, I think there are some superstars primed to have big years. We saw Jon Moxley have an incredible year in 2020. You've seen Sasha Banks finally get her run. It seems like all the horsewomen have finally gotten their run. So you have a lot of big stars, but even two people like Thunder Rosa. You've seen so many people, WWE, AEW, and beyond, have really big years. So who do you think, Will, can have a breakout year in 2021, or maybe who will continue to carry the torch?
Yeah, breakout year. That's a really good topic to get into. And there's a lot of options when you look at the landscape of all these different companies coming out of this, hopefully, I should say, coming out of this COVID era that we've been in. And hopefully we're headed towards, there's rumors of fans back at WrestleMania, and hopefully, things will start opening up and that'll become more of a regular thing and we'll start seeing more shows again. Yeah. Hopefully this is going to be a very different environment and an opportunity for people that had just been performing to TV screens, or in a lot of cases performing to just nobody there, at all, not even screens to look back at, like in the Thunderdome setup, where it's going to become a very different environment. And hopefully it's going to pay off for some people. To go through some companies real quick, when I'm thinking that we'll start at the top, we'll start with WWE. The first name that's been jumping out at me for, God, I would say probably since the summer. It's been primed, it's been ready, and it seems like it's starting to happen. The first person that comes to mind for me is Bianca Belair. Yeah, she is in the position where The next step is now.
Yeah.
How big that next step is going to be is the question. I don't know if she goes all the way to getting, winning the Women's Royal Rumble, to possibly going, bigger than that, getting into, a major title match at WrestleMania. But at the minimum, this is the time to put her in some featured important position that's going to take her to that next level. She's ready.
Agreed.
She's ready, and the time's now.
She's been ready. She is super athletic. She has a great amount of charisma. She is easy to root for. And despite WWE creative at times, which we could probably go on that all day, but she's come off looking really good in pretty much everything she does. Kind of making the old chicken salad out of chicken scratch sometimes. But I think for the most part, she's been booked well. But I think, she is definitely a name to win the Women's Royal Rumble. It would be, I think, a great time to pull the trigger. I think, like you said, she's ready. I think she's been ready. You could absolutely see her in a women's championship match. Take a look, right? If you matched her up today, she could be going up against somebody like Sasha Banks. That would be a dynamite draw. Even her versus Asuka, or whoever's going to be the Raw Women's Champion. I think I would be a little concerned if she was wrestling Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania, because Charlotte just always seems to, which again, I love Charlotte Flair. Like I said, I think that's just going to be her stage,
Right.
But I think Bianca Belair, on the men's side too, I think that this could finally, and I hope so, you've seen it in the last couple of weeks, this might finally be the time Cesaro cracks the top singles rankings. And again, I know he's not necessarily new, but you've seen Cesaro pick up a couple of big wins, and it looks like they're teasing the Shinsuke Nakamura Cesaro breakup here. Shinsuke is another person. They put out a WWE top 10 this week. And you would think with the top 10 moments clipped together like that he's had like the greatest WWE career ever. But I think what the top 10 did for me, it reminded me how special of a talent he is. You know what I mean? How special of a talent he is, and can break out, even though he's a veteran, a guy who can break out. But I think the other guy too, who you're seeing finally get again that singles push that we think we can have, is Big E.
Absolutely.
Big E has had a tremendous 2020. And I know at one point he was a favorite to win the Royal Rumble. So again, who knows what's going to happen there, but thoughts maybe on Big E's 2021.
Oh, Big E's singles transition into this whole IC title deal and remaking, because his post, I guess, New Day persona, even though they're doing a good job of making it clear that the New Day did not really break up. They just got separated by the draft, which I like. I like that they did that, because everything doesn't always need to be a horrible breakup. It doesn't need to be an angle. It doesn't need to be a feud. Have them we're pursuing our own things, but we're all still buddies, and we're still all cheering for each other. And hell, keep it that way, because then you can have the payoff down the road of if you do go all the way with Big E, two of them can come running out and they have like their big moment, kind of like how when Kofi won the title.
Absolutely.
You don't need to break up the New Day to go down that road. If they're going to go that far with Big E now, I'm just not sure. But it's obviously, if nothing else, he's in the mix. He's in the mix.
Agreed.
He's being featured, and he's being featured well. That's I think the big thing. The thing they're really, since we're talking about another SmackDown star here, what they're really nailing on SmackDown right now, I think, is that they have so many people that they're featuring that aren't the same old faces, that they're featuring in really prime positions and in ways where it's like, okay, if we want to go with Big E, we can start going with Big E, and we've laid the groundwork. If we want to go with Nakamura, we just turned him. He's got some steam on him. We could go with Nakamura and it would work. Cesaro, we've started featuring. Daniel Bryan, we got him hyping up that he's never won the Rumble and he wants it. So Kevin Owens is still feuding with Roman Reigns and all that. And the name I'm going to throw in here that's kind of off in the corner, but he's in that mix right there with all the tough stuff that's going up on top. We got Jey Uso.
Yes.
We got Jey Uso, who's had his little thing with Roman Reigns, and now he's had to submit to the tribal chief. But you could tell there's a lot of drama there. There's a lot of emotion there. And eventually, I'm sure that's going to come circling back, and it's going to bubble over. And Jey Uso has just had an incredible fall. And I'm really curious to see where this goes as we head into WrestleMania season. do they do something more with him, or is it turn into, okay, he plays into things with WrestleMania, then maybe post WrestleMania is his big moment coming there.
Yeah.
But they've done a tremendous job of just like all these people orbiting Roman Reigns since his character shift have all been elevated by it.
Tremendous.
And there's a lot to do there, and there's a lot of mileage left in it. I think the biggest thing I'm really starting to realize going into Mania season is like, I don't know if I want it at the end yet, because I just see, heck, you got all these people who are very viable challengers and are getting so much juice out of this. It's like, why turn off the faucet? You know,
I
milk
agree.
it for all it's worth, man. You know,
absolutely. I think they're gonna try to look for some kind of ending pop at WrestleMania. But if you need that ending pop, you know, maybe you have, you know, not that I want to see another Goldberg title run in 2021. But maybe The Miz does cash in on Drew McIntyre. You know what I mean? Maybe Drew gets his moment in Tampa, in front of the fans that, you know, it's been talked about. They said they want to get him that moment. McIntyre had an incredible 2020. I think he's been an excellent WWE champion. You know, one of the first face champions, you know, that I feel like we've been able to really get behind for a while. I wouldn't say forever, but for a while, you know?
No, absolutely. He's a fresh face. And the big thing is, given the ridiculous circumstances he's been stuck with for his very first, you know, becoming champion, he's performed incredibly well.
He's done great.
This could have been a disaster to crown a brand new guy as the WWE champion, and under these circumstances where it's like, look, you have no fans at all for months. You don't even get to win the title for the first time in front of a crowd. It's like, it could have been a mess. And I think if anything, he's earned to have like like you were saying, his moment. Let him have his moment for like going through all this, and you know, I guess, you know, what would the word be? Not enduring this, I guess, essentially this whole this whole COVID world that we've been trying to get through for the past, you know, almost a year now.
You know, and I think too that I think could lend itself to maybe Roman does retain. Maybe, you know, we don't need that, or maybe they do it for a short-term pop. Hey, Brian gets them, you know, WrestleMania for the moment, but then, you know, you follow that up on SmackDown or the next pay-per-view, and the head of the table returns, you know. But I agree with you. I think there's a lot of mileage left. And we're talking about breakout stars, but I want to switch gears a little bit, because this brought up something in my mind that I think you're going to appreciate this question, being that we're the big magazine guys and stuff like that. I was talking to a couple of friends who we think is going to be maybe number one next year's PWI 500. Who will be the guy that we look back the way we kind of did at Jon Moxley, who Jon Moxley took and proved that he was everything that Dean Ambrose could have been. You know what I mean? That maybe it was, because I used to look back and go, Ambrose matches just don't deliver. You know, like what, he just seemed tamed. And then you realize the guy didn't want to be tamed. This is what kind of was happening, you know, for right or wrong, you know? Right. Comes out, has a tremendous 2020, really shows that he does have that edge. Right now, I'm going to say my front runners for the number one spot have to obviously be Roman Reigns. He is phenomenal each and every week. And I think, especially if this other guy collects what he says he's going to collect and has the run that I think he has in him, Kenny Omega, I think could have the year in 2021 that we finally see this New Japan version of Kenny Omega.
It's funny because we are so on the same wavelength with that. That's exactly who I was gonna say.
Get out of my head,
add to that, because I mean, Roman, obviously the thing is his whole thing started in the fall, so we've already seen a good 4 to 5 months of this new version, the tribal chief, so we know what we're getting. We kind of have some groundwork laid. Kenny just won the belt. It's still pretty fresh, and it's just getting started. We got the Impact invasion going on and all this, and the going back and forth, but it's really, we're in the early stages of it, of the metamorphosis into this different Kenny Omega, this superstar playboy Kenny Omega with the flashy shirts and, the fancy shoes and all this. And I mentioned this on the Big Gold Belt podcast when we did our year-end show, and we kind of were talking about looking ahead to this year. My thing with Kenny, I think, is that the key thing for this year for him is going to be this run, and this run establishing him at that level in the United States.
Absolutely.
To the fans that do not know his New Japan run.
Yeah.
And I think it was a very smart move to not just rehash what he did in New Japan, that they're not saying, okay, we're going to make him the champion, and he's just, you know, Kenny Omega has the fancy, the great matches, and, you know, you're going to see lots of moves. And I think someone, I don't know if it was him or other people at AEW, who knows, but the focus on this time it being, it's not about the matches right now. It's about the Kenny Omega character change.
Yes.
It's on this new presentation where he's a completely different guy. Yeah. And the wrestling is almost secondary. I'm much more interested in the character that he's becoming, and the whole thing with, you know, Don Callis involved and all this. It's like, I'm really curious to see how it goes. And I truly think if this works for this year, like I said, it'll be between him and Roman Reigns. Unless someone else suddenly comes out of the pack, it's going to be between him and Roman Reigns. But I look at this journey he's on right now and how it's presented and how it works in AEW and in the other companies, you know, between AAA, since he's got the mega title, and Impact, if he ends up going, you know, for the title there, they certainly seem to be teasing. If they do all this across these different companies throughout the year, I figure this is his make or break year for him.
Yeah.
Either it's going to work and it's going to be a huge success, or it's going to go for a while and it's going to fall flat. And I think that's going to be, he'll just be, you know, he'll always be a EVP. He'll be a top guy in AEW, but this is the run he has to do to take that step to that next level in the US, to take it beyond the hardcore fans where it's just, you know, where it's more than just him putting on matches. This is about character work. This is about a full featured star. That's the difference I'm seeing with this. And that's what I'm really curious to watch.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that this has been a nice slow burn here. I think they're not rushing. And I think too, you know, I believe that Tony Khan is smart enough to, and I think Don Callis is smart enough to not recreate kind of what WWE did with the Invasion. You know, we're not going to make Impact heels. We're not going to make everybody's kind of mixed here, you know. It kind of, depending on the territory, similar, right, to when you had the Bret Hart, Steve Austin feud, Canada versus the US.
Right.
You know, they were baby faces in Canada, but they were heels in America. You know what I mean? All that stuff. So I think there's that little bit of an element to it. But I think too, like you said, the character work, because the wrestling, the great thing is, even though the wrestling's secondary, it's been excellent. The Impact 6-man match was unbelievably good. The Rey Fenix match was very, very good. One of the better AEW matches. People are starting to finally see that Kenny Omega might be who people have said he was. Might be the guy that we've always heard about. And I think he's slowly letting that out of the bag. And so I really, like you said, I like the build. I like what they're doing. I'm very interested to see. I do believe Kenny will be the belt collector. I do believe he'll beat Rich Swann, which this is a great spot for Rich Swann too, a high profile match. He had a pretty solid 2020. Impact definitely means more now than it has in many years. You know, Impact is still Impact to a degree. You know,
it's nothing. This whole thing is nothing but upside for Impact.
Yeah,
from the
really
beginning, I was like, they're the ones with everything to gain. They're gaining the exposure. They're the ones getting, like, you know, to ride on the wave of AEW. It's AEW is getting the whole thing. Okay, we get to use this as a story, you know, element to create this Kenny Omega character and to change all this and do this whole thing of bringing in Don Callis. But Impact, it's gravy for them. They're getting exposure. They're getting introduced to an audience that wouldn't be seeing them otherwise. So it's nothing but upside for them.
Agreed. And I think this shows, well, you know, AEW thinks they're important enough to involve, you know, so that's a big rub right there, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, and so you're getting Impact's name. They're kind of getting some of that TNA stink off of them. You know, and they have some great talent on the roster. Like I said, I look at, especially the women, right? You look at folks like Jordan Grace. You look at people like Deonna Perazo, you know, who WWE completely missed the boat on. You know, and that's going to happen, you know, but Deonna's really made the most of it, I think. She's another one who I think is going to have a big 2021. Is Deonna Perazo. And she already had a great 2020, but I see a lot of really good things for her in 2021. And I think, too, this will help the vision of where AEW's women's division goes. I think it looks like they're really trying to build around, even though she's not technically signed, is Thunder Rosa. You know, Britt Baker is going to be a big name there. You know, Penelope Ford is very talented, still has some ways to go, but very talented. You know, so I think there's, you know, this benefits AEW as well in terms of, because the tag divisions are very deep.
Right.
But the women's division, Impact has a much deeper women's division.
Absolutely.
Than
Absolutely.
AEW. And that could be a real big benefit for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, AEW's weakest point has been the women's division from the beginning. It's been like that for a long time. And Impact, however they've done it over the past, 2 years, they've done it. I've said for a long time, Impact's women's division, I think, is the strongest outside of NXT. It's just got the depth. It's got fresh faces. Yes. It's not, relying on the same old names of the past. It's like everything about the Impact women's division I love. And so that's the first thing I think when I was looking at this whole crossover beginning. First thing I was thinking, I was like, man, if I'm Tony Khan, I'm looking at that Impact women's roster, and I was like, how can I get my hands on some of this? Because that's the biggest thing he needs the help with. So no, I'm very curious to see how that works out. Because like I said, the tag scene, they got the tag teams. They've had the tag teams all the time. So like the Good Brothers being there, that's okay. You can do all that, but it's like it's not as pressing and as needed of a thing.
Absolutely.
But the women's division needs that shot in the arm.
Agreed.
To get it to give some depth to it and to give some. The biggest thing with AEW's women's division, it's just like you said, you have like some top people there, but it's very inconsistent. It goes up and down, and it's just week to week, you don't see the consistency in that division of just solid wrestling. And that's what they need to even out.
Yeah, and that's where I think the wrestling needs to be kind of paramount, right? Is that that's their focus, because right now, like I said, you have, and I give them credit. Like I said, they've had the belt on Hikaru Shida for quite some time, who I think has done a pretty good job with what she's been given. But like, and I remember looking at the Thunder Rosa match with her, and I remember going, okay, maybe there's some legs here. Maybe there's something to this. And I think, like I said, I would love to see, you hear about Riho coming back, potentially coming back into the States here, within the next month or so. Obviously that depends on COVID restrictions and things, but yeah, I agree. I think that, this is a marriage that works really good for both sides. And I think if they do this right, this could be beneficial for two companies for many years to come. It could really push them to that point where they're seen, okay, like it could really change the perception in wrestling. So let's switch gears a little bit here. So we've talked about some of the current stuff here. We have talked about who we think are going to have big 2021s, the AEW Impact shift. What we want to talk about now is the wrestling that we fell in love with, the classics. Now we're getting into the good stuff.
There you go.
So Will had a similar background to me, where in his area of the world there, lots of wrestling on TV, especially in the mid to late 80s. You had still some of the territories going. You had companies just kind of going national. There was a lot of wrestling, for better or for worse, on television. We'll talk about some of the wrestling you grew up on, some of the influences you had, some of the stuff you really enjoyed. What made you a fan?
Oh man, I think back on this. I knew we'd be getting into this. I was going back in my mind today of like the first stuff I remember seeing. I want to say that I'm in the DC area, and in the 80s, so we wired up for cable in the early 80s and all that, all the big cable channels, no problem with any of that. But I want to say the first stuff I really remember seeing, the earliest memory I kind of have, is I remember being on some vacation, like to Virginia Beach or something. And I think parents were trying to keep me occupied while they were doing stuff, getting stuff ready. And they threw on the TV, and it was around Saturday night, early evening. And I think we found the TBS show, 605 classic, at sometime in the mid 80s. That's like the earliest memory. I remember the flags, hanging from the ceiling in Techwood Drive. That's the thing I remember standing out, and that whole setup of how it was set up. And I want to say something from Techwood Drive in the old days was like the first stuff I remember seeing that resonates. I remember it clearly. Don't remember who it was, but it was obvious. It was the TBS show. It was the TBS show. So it was Crockett era. It's probably around 85 or so when they got back on there. Somewhere in there is when I first, I'm sure I saw stuff before that, but that's the one I definitely remember being in this hotel room and watching wrestling for about an hour. And then after that, it'd be around, I'd check it out here and there, but I wasn't hooked or anything yet. I wouldn't say it was till around Mania 3, which, that was just such a damn big deal.
Oh, yeah.
I remember WrestleMania 3. I wasn't so sucked into things yet that I was all psyched up because we didn't have pay-per-view. So it was like, there was no way to see it live. It was like sort of like, going to closed circuit, and my parents weren't going to take me to closed circuit.
No.
So I remember months later, at some point, WrestleMania ended up on Showtime.
Wow.
And they were replaying WrestleMania on Showtime, like in full. It was like,
so cool.
Yeah, and so I remember eventually seeing WrestleMania 3 on Showtime at some point, and it was on a lot on there for maybe a month. And so I watched it a bunch of, of course, that whole stuff with the huge stadium, the Silver Dome, and all the light, it just that's the kind of thing as a kid, it catches your eye. So it's just like that whole spectacle. That's where I kind of really started getting into things. And I'm pretty sure before I saw, in the build going up, I saw everything, Macho Man and Steamboat. That whole damn thing, that's like, that was like the legendary playground feud growing up.
Yeah.
The bell angle. I mean, geez, I can't think of any kids that age who hadn't seen the damn attack with the bell and Ricky having to do the throat exercises and talk again and all that. It's like everyone knew all about all that. I can only imagine if we'd been able to watch that show the night it happened, just how damn exciting it would have been. But there was no pay-per-view. So it was like all of us had to wait, and we eventually all saw it later on. But it was around, and that's why I kind of really started getting into things.
Yeah.
So you have that time. So that's 87. And that's around when, like, I remember that. And our big thing, I remember that time period, since we had cable, ESPN showing World Class after school.
Yes.
4 o'clock, coming home from school and World Class being on. So there'd be a lot of like flipping the channels between cartoons and then World Class being on and catching some of that. And as I got older, it slowly turned into, okay, well, I'm not watching cartoons anymore. Come on, I'm gonna watch World Class after school.
Yeah.
So you'd have World Class on there. And then, of course, Saturday mornings, of course, you had all the syndicated shows. Yeah. So I mean, we had everything. We had NWA, we had Worldwide, we had Pro, we had Superstars, we had Challenge. Like pretty much from like we'd get up on a Saturday morning, and from 9 to 1, it was a solid block. Just jumping between the channels of like, okay, you can tell that all the local channels, like they worked out the deal where it was like, okay, we're showing this at 9, you show this at 10, this other one's showing this at 11. They didn't overlap. It was totally worked out, so you could jump between like, your local channels and see all the wrestling. And being in DC, we were close enough to Baltimore that we also picked up the Baltimore channels.
Oh,
The Baltimore channels tended to show all the wrestling on the weekend at night. So up there, it was like, after like Saturday Night Live time, or like maybe from 10 to like 2. So there'd be different stuff up there that you'd catch that night. Like they'd have World Class, and once it eventually turned to USWA, they had USWA up there. Mm-hmm. So and AWA was on up there. So it was like we were in the right place. That everyone that was a fan around here, it was like, kids say everything's a push of a button. But it was like, there was wrestling on every day of the week in the DC area.
That's awesome.
You just had to make a point of being in front of the TV to see it, or thrown in a VHS tape. But it was there and it was available. But as far as like, I think back to that time period, like sort of the first character that really like grabbed me, it was Macho Man. Macho Man grabbed me. I was never a Hogan kid. Hogan he was too much of a cartoon to me.
Yeah.
Macho Man.
A little bit of Macho Man to him, Randy Savage.
Exactly. Macho Man could be a cartoon, but Macho Man was dangerous.
Yeah.
Macho Man was dangerous and could turn on you like that. And that made it fun. And that made him interesting. That Macho Man always worked for me. That was the first one that really like, I think hooked me and grabbed me in. Yeah. So by the time he became champion in 88, that's when by then I was full gone. I was watching everything. I was watching on the NWA side, I was all about Flair. I was not
You're a
popular
Flair
with the kids
fan.
that
Flair
age.
country.
I was a Flair fan because I was getting be closer to become a teenager. I'm like, what's there not to like about this guy? This guy's talking about money and like hooking up with girls. What's
like you're like, I love this guy.
How is this? Yeah, it's like he's cool. I'm like now I thought Sting was pretty damn cool too. So it's kind of like I was torn when they'd be fighting each other. But I was all
he was
about
a different
Flair.
kind of cool though. Sting. He was kind of like that surfery, like you know what I
Exactly.
mean, that early 90s, late 80s kind of dude. You know, where Flair was like, you might have wanted to date Sting's character, but you wanted to marry Ric Flair's character. You wanted to be
right.
You know what I mean?
There you
like you wanted to be what he was, you know, wearing the suits and with the girls on each arm and the big gold belt. It was a beautiful time. And like we had a smattering of different things. I grew up in Staten Island, New York, and then moved to New Jersey when I was like 10 or 11. And funny thing too is Randy Savage used to live on Staten Island, right behind our mall, behind the Staten Island Mall. Yeah, he lived on Staten when he worked for Vince McMahon and in the WWF when New York was really the home base. He made his home on Staten Island for many years. I never got to see him, but we knew of people. Oh, I saw the Macho Man at the supermarket, like, or you know, I saw him in Elizabeth, you know, or whatever. So I never had the opportunity, but he was from my own backyard, you know. So he lived there for quite a few years while he worked for the WWF. But I grew up as a WWF kid, you know. I loved the NWA, but Hulk Hogan was what drew me in. Hulkamania. I owned a replica of the big green belt. I had all the WWF LJN guys, the ring, you know, the whole 9 yards, man.
Nice.
And I was just hooked. I loved it. Hogan was, I think that was the thing that like did draw me, was that he was so larger than life in such a like superhero-ish kind of way. But I love the Macho Man Warrior when he came around, the Ultimate Warrior, like so all the colors and all the different
Warrior was so hot.
Oh, dude.
From 88 to 90, he was so damn hot. And it was just like the moment he won that title, it was like the bottom fell out.
Yeah.
They didn't have the opponents for him. But it was I remember everyone when that match was coming for WrestleMania 6, Hogan Warrior. I remember by that point, Hogan had been dominant for so long. Everyone I knew, except for maybe one or two kids, everyone was like, oh, we want Warrior. Everyone was behind Warrior winning that match. People wanted that change. And then once they got it, it was just kind of like, oh, okay.
You know? And which, they put him with Rick Rude, which Rick Rude was tremendous. But that was a feud we had seen just a year before. And Warrior won it, you know? And so again, you know, Mr. Perfect, you know, I don't know, Hogan had beaten him already, you know what I mean? DiBiase had been beaten already, you know, so all the guys that went through Warrior, Hogan had already beaten, you know, so it was, you know, like you said, there was no opponent. And sometimes the chase is better than the actual, you know, the crowning moment is like the peak, you know what I mean? That's where it goes like that sharp decline, you know? And so, because I know the original, they talked about the original plans being Hogan and Warrior 2 years in a row, Hogan, quote unquote, getting the win back. You know, but you take a look, as much as the Warrior, and I don't want to say he bombed, but as much as the reign wasn't great, Randy Savage's reign was tremendous. He drew well. They believe Randy Savage could make it work. And it could largely be due to the fact that Randy was a better promo. Randy Savage was a better in-ring wrestler. You know, where the Warrior was great and he was exciting, he didn't have the depth that a Randy Savage had. And so, you know, like I said, if you take a look, maybe if things work out differently and DiBiase does win that tournament and he does get the belt, you have a viable heel for the Warrior to challenge him down the road. Champion. But, you know, like I said, I think it's so funny, how things kind of end up working out and working together. But like I said, Randy Savage was a stellar WWF champion. Drew great everywhere, you know, because even if you look like in the 80s, you know, Hogan was, you know, apart from his claims of wrestling 400 times in a year, you know, generally they didn't run Hogan in the same town month to month. You know, because it would fall flat. You know what I mean? It was only something that you could do so much. So Hogan was saved for those. They knew how to book him. They knew how to, you know what I mean? And nothing wrong with that. Like I said, it worked. It worked great. But Randy Savage was that every night kind of guy that you can go and people are going to see I Felt in every city. You know, people are going to see and go, yeah, I want to see that match, you know. Where Hogan, it was the same kind of thing over and over. And again, nothing wrong. He found what works and he stuck with it and it worked. And that's what you do, right? He made money hand over fist.
Absolutely.
He's still probably the most recognizable professional wrestler ever. You know what I mean? Largely, I mean, 90% of America knows who Hulk Hogan is. You know, so it's just crazy to see the influence that you say, hey, name a wrestler. You know what I mean? Oh, well, Hulk Hogan. You know?
Yeah, outside of him, it's probably The Rock. You know,
The Rock,
for the modern
you know
fans.
what I mean? Yeah, you know, and so people who just know of wrestling, who might not even be fans, well, I know The Rock was a wrestler. I know Hulk Hogan was a wrestler. You know, so things like that. But back to kind of what else we had there. So I was hooked on the Hulkamania. I had the NWA, big Sting fan. I was actually there the night Flair regained the title from Sting, January 11th, 91, a blizzard at the Meadowlands.
At the Meadowlands, yeah.
At the Meadowlands, there was about 4,000 people there. And Flair regained the title. I remember going home so disappointed, but Sting's foot was on the rope, you know, all this stuff. But you know, it was great to be a part of history. That was the first ever WCW championship match. Was that night at the Meadowlands, you know, and it was just a snowy mess, you know, but a great memory for sure. But we had world class. Like I said, I really got into the Von Erichs, and they were still showing older clips too. They had that Legends of World Class show.
Yes.
That would show clips from like a few years before, because by 87, 88, the product wasn't as strong. You know, the tragedies that happened, and you know,
87 is a very rough year. Yeah, with that all on the network now, it's like, God, you pull those episodes up on the WWE network, and it's like, whoo, that sportatorium is empty. The lights are off, and it's just like, man, the fall off the cliff was fast. But yeah, I'm remembering. They always showed all the old footage on that ESPN show all the time. Remember, because it was on 5 days a week. So they were always showing that old stuff. So, I mean, that's how I remember getting introduced to, like, you know, Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams. And, like, it was all about, like, the dynamic duo and all that.
Oh, they were fantastic.
Brody, of course. It was like, they milked that old footage for what it was worth. And for, you know, kids like us who, like, you know, it wasn't, there was no network. There was video, and there was no world-class videotapes that you could go to the store and get. So it was like, it was smart to replay that old stuff, because that's how we found out about the history.
Yeah, and I think it's a big reason why the Von Erichs are still, why so many people grew up on the Von Erichs, because most people had ESPN. Those old tapes were getting, so people were rewatching Kerry beating Flair. Oh man, this guy beat Ric Flair, you know. They were watching, you know, rewatching Andre the Giant come to the Sportatorium and teaming with Iceman King Parsons. They were watching all that stuff in the late 80s, you know. So, you know, they had that. I remember we had ICW, you know, the Mario Saldi or the Joe Saldi, you know, promotion. And they had some guys, like I said, Brody was there at some point. You know, Kevin Sullivan, Tony Atlas was there. But around 1990, you know, 91, they became, you know, International World Class Championship Wrestling.
Right.
They bought the rights or whatever. And every week, I kid you not, they played the Vic Steamboat beating Tony Atlas. The ICW Championship. Every week. Like,
that is legendary.
It is legendary. And I feel like I was more familiar with Vic Steamboat than I was with Ricky Steamboat.
Right.
But because you felt like you saw him so much, and you're like, well, is this the only match this guy's ever had? Like, you know,
I tell you, it was so funny because we did not have ICW down here in DC, but everything about it I read about in the aftermath,
in the magazines.
So by that point, I was told, when that whole run was happening with them and the transition to IWCCW, that was really that's when I was getting all the darn aftermaths. So I read all about it. I heard all about, you know, Steamboat beating Tony Atlas finally and all that. And I had family up in upstate New York. So usually, like, back then, between the summer and the holidays, we'd usually go up there and visit them. So I remember we went up there, I think it was during the summer, and we ended up, I don't, that's the thing, I'd go up there, and as soon as I'd get up there, I'd grab the damn TV guide and be looking, okay, what do we have up here? Is there anything we got here that, you know, when are the shows on here? You know, I gotta know what channel they're on, what time they're on. And then, of course, all of a sudden be like, oh, is there anything here that we don't have in DC? Lo and behold, ICW was on up there. So I was like, oh, damn, I'm going to get to see ICW. This is going to be cool. So that Saturday afternoon, it came on some random channel up there, and I threw that on, and oh my God, they played the Steamboat and Atlas match. And I was like,
Yeah.
I was so
saw
psyched.
it.
I was like, I'd heard all about this in the PWI. I thought it was like a bit, what great luck I had that I got to see Steamboat and
That was
Atlas
this big
and see
title
the match.
change, right?
Yeah. Thought it was like a big deal because I'd read about it in the magazines, and I was like, oh my God, the dumb luck that the 1 week I happened to be here, they're playing this match. And then I find out it's like, oh, they were doing that for like the whole damn year.
Yeah.
But it was hilarious. I got to see that match, and I was like, oh my God, I finally saw it.
Yeah, and you're turning it on, right? And it's from like these little dank, dumpy arenas, like the ring looks like it's falling apart. But one of the matches that they played, and they played this somewhat often, was there was a wrestler back in the day, Surfer Ray Odyssey.
Yes.
And he'd wrestle in a wetsuit, and he had like the suntan notion on it, his nose and all that. And he came out to like Surfing USA. And there was a manager there, the late great Boston bad boy Tony Rumble.
Yes.
And he managed not just Tony Atlas, the world champion. He managed the man who wanted to be the ICW light heavyweight champion, a man known as the Tasmaniac.
Yeah.
Who we now know today as Taz. And I remember watching Taz defeat Surfer Ray Odyssey with a suplex to win the ICW light heavyweight championship.
Wow.
And when he still had the face paint and that little patch of hair.
The crazy hair.
And he'd wear the furry singlet, He didn't speak, but you talk about things that you remember, not only that, I remember the early 90s. Now we vacationed, my grandparents had a house 45 minutes outside of Tampa from about 1981 on. So I started going down there, probably knows, very little, so we're talking 84, 85, 86. And I really didn't know much about Florida wrestling then, other than I remember like my uncle sending me tapes of like PWF in the late 80s, the Rhodes promotion. But that was after, the glory days of Florida. That I didn't discover until like my teens via tapes. But I remember they had a block of wrestling in the afternoons. I forget what day of the week it was on. It was ECW, when it was NWA Eastern Championship Wrestling.
Okay.
Then it was Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Then it was USWA Wrestling, all in a block. And so we're talking like 93, the McMahon USWA feud.
Right.
In that little studio in Memphis. I remember Vince coming on wearing the old AWA unified belt, and it was just like surreal. And I remember being super pumped. There was a match coming up. Steven Dunn was coming from the WWF, so this might have been around 94. And Steve Dahl had a very good career as a tag team wrestler, wrestled in Portland, wrestled a bunch of different places. So at this point, he was Steven Dunn, and he was going to challenge Brian Christopher for the Texas Heavyweight Championship. I remember being super into Brian Christopher. I just thought he was so cool. He had that look about him. He, you know what I mean? And I remember being really hooked for that match. But I also remember too, you look at the ECW, and again, you have Tasmaniac Sabu right there. Terry Funk is in there. Road Warrior Hawk is in there. Shane Douglas, was the champion at this point, managed by the sensational Sherry. And and one of the stark memories that I have is, first, it was like, oh man, Road Warrior Hawk's using Iron Man again. That I remembered, because the Road Warriors in the AWA scared the crap out of me as a kid. Scared the absolute crap out of me. One of the first times I had seen them, Kurt Hennig had gotten his head stuck in the ropes, and they busted him open and all that. I remember being like, oh my God, like these guys could kill me, I was scared to death of them as a kid. Until of course I saw the NWA, and I'm like, oh, these guys are cool, But I remember, and this just shows you like how great the Road Warriors were. Shane Douglas is going to he's going to defend the title coming up at a show in Pennsylvania against Road Warrior Hawk. And so he calls out Road Warrior Hawk. Iron Man hits, the ECW arena goes crazy. Hawk walks into the ring. Shane grabs a chair, cracks him over the head. Hawk no sells it completely.
Of
and the music
course.
stops the minute he makes contact with the chair.
Right.
And I about jumped out of my chair. I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen, you know? And
Shane's
it's
gonna
just,
get it now.
yeah, like, and Douglas, you know, played so scared he just left the ring, you know, he just rolled out of the ring. He's like, I don't want any of that. But I remember, like, you know, and it's so funny the things that you look back on and you have memories on that people would probably look back and go, well, what's so special about that? But it was special at the time. It was something that made us feel something. It was something that we remembered as a great memory. You know, I remember the Steamboat Flair angle, right, where they're battling each other before the bout in New Orleans, and he's ripping off Flair's suit, and they're fighting with all the girls in the ring. Like, I remember, like, I wasn't thinking like people think now, well, that's the greatest trilogy of matches, you know?
Right.
I'm thinking, I want to see Ricky Steamboat whoop Ric Flair's ass, you know? Like,
Right, yeah. It's all about that moment
special.
and how it resonates.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I love that. I love hearing the things, like I said, like when you were talking about seeing the Steamboat Atlas match, like that was a big moment. People look back and go, it's a special about this match.
No,
but
totally.
It was special at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and that got me thinking about, since you guys are the magazine folks, all the old school retro magazines you post, like what I was saying, talking about how that match was built up to me simply through those magazines, because I had never even seen ICW at that point. And you know, nowadays, okay, everything's a push of a button. You can learn about any darn wrestler in the world, see footage of them, watch matches, no problem. But God, back when we were, you know, coming up, those magazines, that was how we learned about so many wrestlers in these territories that, you know, you couldn't get, like Portland. I mean, I remember, God, I think back to, you know, late 80s, and it's like seeing all the coverage in the After mags about how Scotty the Body was doing the whole the wedding angle out there in Portland. And they were covering that in PWI every month, how he was going to do the wedding angle and all that. And that played out. But never seen the guy, but they built him up as this big deal and this future star, and he was going to be one of the big guys in the 90s. And then lo and behold, you know, a year or so goes by and Global starts up on ESPN, and I finally get to see Scotty, but I knew who he was already simply because of the magazines. So him showing up, he was a made guy to me. I had never seen him. I was like, he'd been talked up in those magazines so long for his Portland run that I was like, oh damn, this Global's going to be no joke. They got Scotty the Body down here. And then, of course, he goes over to WCW and becomes Scotty Flamingo. And all that. But
and then he beats Pillman, and you're like, this guy is amazing. Like,
PWI was right. He's going to be the man of the 90s. They were telling me back in 88, and that's how it was done. That's how it was done back then. It was, and that was the great thing. Something nostalgic about that. Something about that's cool. I don't know.
I still, and like Scotty has a lot of the signed stuff. And through him, I've been able to get some stuff signed. I'm not like huge on needing signatures, but I love every now and again, like I have them kind of separated by year, and I just go through, you know, what was happening summer of 84. You know what I mean? And I look back and I love the rankings page, you know, the territories. You got Northwest, you got Mid-South.
Seeing who was where at that point in time.
You know, and people, you know, it would blow their minds to see, all these wrestlers. And I used to make these fantasy tournaments, you know, all right, this guy was number one in this, you know what I mean? This guy was number one in this one. And I would like think up these dream matches, you know, or you'd see, you know, like you'd see the pull-out posters, you know, Magnum T, I remember, was the North American champion, you know, I remember, oh gosh, that's such a cool belt. You know, he's a North American champion, you know. That was one of my favorite posters. But when I was younger, I remember my uncle in Staten Island, there was a corner store. It was like a deli, you know, kind of thing. Huge magazine rack. And we would go every weekend. And I would leave there with like 8 magazines, from everything from the After mags to Wrestling's Main Event to all the Napolitano mags, Wrestling Eye, anything I could get my hands on. And I would sit there at like 4 or 5 years old and be in those magazines for a week until we went again next month or whatever, you know, and it was incredible. It was an incredible time to see. And I think too, like you're starting to see a little bit more of that. The fact that there is more wrestling available now than previously, you know, we grew up very spoiled in terms of, there's a lot of different wrestling, you know, here there's a lot of independent, and it's great, but it's not always accessible. Thank God to for digital footage and digital media and all that. Now you can
Right.
really see a lot of different styles from all over the world. You can see Japan more easy. You know, before it was just, oh man, you got to get tapes if you want to see Japan
Yep.
stuff. You can see that easily. They have a streaming network. You have IWTV, right? You have high spots
Yep.
putting things out there. YouTube, all these things. So you're seeing all these different styles of wrestling, and then you're kind of seeing these guys get called up. Oh man, so and so's in NXT now. Or man, so and so was on AEW Dark. I wonder if they're going to get signed. So you see these things. So to me, like I like that because it reminds me of that nostalgic, feel of there was a lot of wrestling. There was a lot of different wrestling and guys that you hope to maybe see match up at some point in time. So that's really fun. But what I wanted to ask, and this is, like I said, I think when I look back and I think of, the guys that, or the match that, like I said, you had talked about that Steamboat Savage match, right? That had been kind of, man, this was the match. This
Right.
was the match. When you see things in different eras and you go, well, I wonder what could hold up. You know what I mean? Do matches hold up now as they go along? Do matches hold up? What matches from yesteryear that you think that you grew up on? Obviously, I think Steamboat and Savage is one of them. That still hold up. You're like, I watched this and I feel the same way I did when I originally watched it.
Yep. God, there's a bunch. And I'm gonna throw a couple out here that I can think of, that stuff that I go back and I'll pull up, and at a drop of the hat, I can watch it any darn time. Now I'm gonna be into it and it still holds up. God.
Yeah.
Okay. When I first started trading tapes finally and started being able to get old footage and get my hands on stuff that I couldn't find at the video store, when I finally got my hands on Starrcade 85 and got to see Magnum and Tully in the cage,
yes,
I tell you, a hate-filled brawl is timeless. Timeless. It don't matter that it was 1985, which now, God, we're talking 40 damn years since that damn match. Like, come on. Yeah. That match holds up for the emotion involved, for the intensity involved. Those two made you believe. Like I said, that is a hate-filled brawl in a cage, blood and guts wrestling that holds up. Great stuff.
Absolutely.
Another one that I'll throw on a lot randomly that people don't really think of, but God, just a hard-hitting tag team match. Stuff like the Steiners versus the Nasty Boys.
Halloween favorites.
Halloween Havoc.
My goodness.
Where they just come out there for a good, good 8-9 minutes, and they just kill each other.
Oh my god. And the crowd is so hot in Chicago. And I love when they're gonna do, I think it's what, the Bulldog off the top, and Paul Heyman says, oh my God, what are they going to do to him?
Yeah.
And then
I think that was the first time they hit it. Cause I remember that. I remember watching that night live, and I lost my mind. I was like, what the hell is this? that one,
incredible. The Steiners are timeless to me. That era of the Steiners, like, unbelievable. And the Nasty Boys were perfect opponents. And even to you talk, right, Starrcade 85, Magnum and Tully. And people said, well, Tully never said I quit. People still feel about that. Well, he said yes, but he didn't say I quit. She's baby doll, she's crying outside the cage, and Magnum TA, what else can you say about two professionals like Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard? Really could make you feel. Magnum was just so passionate. You know what I mean? Like, he was just great. Awesome. Anything else that you wanted to throw in there? Any other matches that you thought of that were, this still stands the test of time today?
There's so many, and just I'm trying to think of stuff I've recently watched. That's, what I watched this weekend? I watched it Saturday night because I hadn't thought about it in ever, and God, it holds up. Flair and Vader at Starrcade 93.
Yes.
That's one of the last really great Flair matches where he still could go, he could hold up his end. And I was watching, I was so into Vader as WCW champ.
He was great.
He was such a monster, and they protected him so well. And when Flair came back, in 93 after the WWF run, I was so just like, like I said, I loved Ric Flair. But by 92, I had moved on to Vader as like the guy for the future
yeah.
that was just like the monster. And I still loved Ric Flair, but I was like, there ain't no damn way I wanted Ric Flair going to get killed. He tried to go against
Yeah.
Vader, and they
Yeah.
worked that match, and Vader dominates most of that thing and
Yeah.
essentially is mauling the hell out of Flair. But
Yeah.
Flair, being the crafty old vet, he pulls it off. It's in Charlotte, his hometown. So it's the total, like, baby face, win of all baby faces win. It's like Lawler winning the title in Memphis.
Tremendous.
You can't, that kind of storytelling and that kind of atmosphere, you can't beat. I watched that Saturday night and I was just like, oh my God, I hadn't watched that one in a while. And I was like, this is the kind of stuff that the right story and the right characters are timeless, and they will transcend the wrestling aspect.
Yeah.
I think every time.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't have said it better. I think you put a bow on it so perfectly with that. You're right, because it will transcend. I remember, the two matches that stand out for me were War Games 91 and War Games 92.
Yes.
I watched both those cage matches. I must have seen them at least 20 times each, and they still get me. Pillman with the shoulder, right? You know what I mean? Sid nearly killing him with the power bomb at the end. Sting coming in on the hot, you know what I mean? He's going to come in against Wyndham and Flair. And then you have 92. You have a whole different cast of characters. Sting's still there, but now he's fighting Rick Rude. Now he's fighting Steve Austin. Now it's Bobby Eaton, Larry Zbyszko. Tremendous. I mean, WCW in that time period, from like 89, 88, 89, 90. Obviously, it's still the end of the Crockett era going into WCW to like 92, 93 is tremendous. There's so many great matches, so many great tag teams, so many great wrestlers, just some dynamite wrestling throughout that time. And me and Scotty always talk about this. To me, the death of WCW, and I hate to say it, but I'm just Hulk Hogan. Hogan coming over. It changed the last great, and not that the NWO wasn't great. There was some plenty of great things that happened after that. But the beginning of the end is Bash at the Beach. With the Hogan Flair match, I think is great. I enjoy that match. I was a big Hogan guy, and as a kid, it was blind faith. Oh, this is Hulk Hogan, and you finally got the Flair Hogan match. After that, I remember like my interest seriously waning in WCW.
That first year of Hogan in WCW, where it becomes the Hulk Hogan show, and he's just rehashing WWE feuds, bringing in Beefcake and Duggan and Earthquake. I mean, all it's just like, oh my God, dude, that was a dark time for a lot of reasons. Lord knows, like you were saying, the NWO era, Nitro era, it's different. It's awesome. It was a great time period, but that is a different WCW from the WCW before Hogan. Those final shows, I mean, Spring Stampede 94 and Slamboree 94, right before Hogan shows up. Those are like the last WCW shows of like the early 90s. And then it turns into something else. And in 96, it starts to pick back up, but it's a totally different WCW
it's a totally different
than it was before that.
It's not this. Like I said, you had guys, Barry Windham, who was a veteran by this point, Dustin Rhodes, who went from being, they're just pushing Dusty's kid, to being an actor. Oh man, Dustin was great, and he really was. He kind of almost had to work harder because his last name was Rhodes. But he was great. Steamboat is in. Zbyszko, Anderson, your Sting is at the top of his game. Rick Rude was phenomenal.
Yeah, the Dangerous Alliance was a murderer's row of heels. Hall of Famers, every damn one of them. And it really doesn't, I think, get stated enough how important it was. I think part of the reason it worked so damn well is because finally you had a group of heels that wasn't the Four Horsemen. You needed that change of a fresh group of people, and Flair wasn't there to kind of still be, taking the spotlight off him. It was like Flair leaving finally like forced them to do something different, and it worked.
And it worked. It worked to perfection. They were strong heels. They won matches. You know what I mean? They weren't just, and they fed great, but they did not. They were not pushovers, but they were mean. They were nasty. I remember them, lashing Steamboat with the belt, throwing his face into the cement, breaking his nose. I mean, they were, and Paulie Dangerous. I mean, to this day, he's one of the best promos that there is, but he is dynamite. Dynamite. Medusa plays a great role. I mean, they were involved in everything, and it was so damn good. So damn good. So with that, wrestling fans, I want to leave you guys with just a reminder, check out Big Gold Belt Podcast. You're going to see more of this great wrestling talk. You're going to see Will and the guys. They're going to talk wrestling, the modern wrestling, but they're also going to give it in a great, fun way. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. Remember, the episodes drop Friday. They're back in a week to discuss the Royal Rumble. So hopefully you guys enjoy the Royal Rumble. Hopefully, too, you watch the wrestling of your choice. Maybe turn on some old Southwest this week. See Tully Blanchard. Maybe turn on some Portland.
How high tag titles.
Yep. The regalia that was Playboy Buddy Rose. Whatever wrestling works for you this week, watch it and enjoy it. I think that's the message that we want to give. But I want to thank Will for coming on, man. This was a blast. This was really a blast. And hopefully, I hope we can do this again sometime for sure.
Absolutely. I'm glad we got to do this. This is a real refreshing deal. To get to talk to old school wrestling is always great, to take that trip down memory lane. Like you were saying, Mike, Big Gold Belt, we got a whole website at biggoldbeltgroup.com with, stories and stuff up there, all the prior episodes of the podcast, which there are over 300 of now. So 300th episode anniversary just happened in December. We're getting ready to come back for 2021, see what happens with this road to WrestleMania. But yeah, like you were saying, we keep it fun. We are not trying to be those damn folks that you see online that are doing nothing but complaining about everything they're seeing in wrestling and are just miserable about it, because it's ridiculous. There's so much wrestling out there to watch right now that if something don't work for you, pick something else and focus on what you like, man. There's so much variety right now that's like we grew up with, and it's great to have that variety. So please check it out. Like I say, you can find me at Heel Will Mahoney on Twitter, and we're keeping it fun, man. Watch some wrestling. Too much drama in the world. Need us escape.
and Will, again, a great guy to chat wrestling with on Twitter. So if you're on that avenue, you're on that app, chat him up, man. It's enjoy. That's how, like I said, I came across Will. We would chat on Twitter about wrestling, and he's just a passionate fan, a great guy, and one of the more positive presence on Twitter. So I think you guys will really enjoy that too. So hit us up, chat with us. We love hearing from you. Tell us who you want us to try to connect with. Who do you want to see us interview? We're going to try to get some names for you, but we're going to talk wrestling with great fans, just great people. Like I said, we've had Carrie Silken. We have Will. We're going to have a couple other really great guests for you this season. So join us, come along for the ride with us. And we hope that you enjoy the journey with us. Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.